Welcome, students, to this research study on John Locke's The Second Treatise on Civil Government. Before we begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about democracy. Democracy is a concept that you have grown up with, obviously. Your parents grew up with, your grandparents grew up with. It's a concept, it's a form of government that's been so prevalent for the last couple of hundred years that we've almost taken for granted just where it came from. Currently in the world, there's about 100 and little less than 120 countries that have some sort of democratically elected government. But if you rewound the clock about 400 years, this map might look a little more like this. Yeah, there were virtually no democratically elected governments as far back as the 16th and early 17th centuries. There were some, to be sure, but it was usually only in local regions, not really big, wide-scale implementation across a nation. So the history of the world being so old, our recorded histories are well over 5,000 years old. What happened? What happened in just the last 400 years that took our map from this to this? Let's talk about where did our democracy come from, our meaning our modern democracy. We all know that a number of ancient societies dabbled in some form of democracy, but we need to keep in mind that these early democracies still had a ton of problems. You see, representative government is very difficult to maintain when under constant threat of invasion. It's very difficult to find consensus in some democratically elected Senate when you've got 100,000 Persians marching at your gates. Similarly, it's also very difficult for everyone to have a say in how the country is run when communication over distances is slow and unreliable. When getting the results of an election in requires that you send a horse and carriage, 1,000 miles away to retrieve ballots, that sort of thing. So our early democracies not quite full representative or full popular democracies. We often think about democracy in Athens, the city-state. What we don't remember is that it only lasted about 150 years, which is well short of what our current democracy has lasted. And it's really kind of unfair to even say that it lasted 150 years because it was constantly threatened by potential tyrants who would try to take the sole control of political power. Perhaps we also remember the Roman Republic. That lasted a good 450 years after the original Roman kingdom Roman monarchy was overthrown. But we also tend to forget that despite that being this kind of beacon of democracy, it gave way to the far more successful Roman Empire. Yeah, when we think of the expanse of of Rome, going all the way up into Britain and all the way over, into Spain and into Greece and parts of the Middle East, that was actually more of the Roman Empire that did the conquering and that saw the most success. And in both cases, the democracy in Athens and in the Roman Republic, we have to keep in mind, too, that both democratic governments were rife with aristocracy. They were both controlled by powerful aristocracies, powerful groups of individuals whose families were wealthy and had just retained power for decades and decades and decades. So it wasn't really even all that egalitarian. Yeah, so the ancient world may have come up with the idea of democracy, but it's clear they weren't really capable of implementing it, at least not in the scope that we see today, with modern democracies having stood for hundreds of years. So that begs the question, where does our American modern democracy come from? Who do we owe it to? Well, I think we owe it to this guy, John Locke. John Locke was a 17th century political philosopher, English philosopher and physician, and he was one of the most influential thinkers of the Enlightenment period. In Locke's writings, he proposed a radical conception of political philosophy, which was deduced from the principle of self-ownership and the corollary right to own property. If that kind of sounds familiar as words that come from our own Declaration of Independence, they should. Our founding fathers took a lot of what Locke said under consideration when writing that declaration and then subsequently the Constitution. Locke also argued that the divine right of kings is supported neither by Scripture nor by the use of reason, which until this point was the predominant philosophy. Kings ruled because they were born to rule, because they came from a bloodline that was divinely gifted with rule, as set forth in the Bible. His second treatise, here's a little background on that. Back in 1688, which Locke had already been working on his second treatise before this happened, but in 1688, King James II was overthrown by William III. William III had been the head of of a Dutch and was also married to King James's eldest daughter. What happened, this was known as the Glorious Revolution, and what happened here is that various factions in Britain, mainly parliamentarians, tried to and succeeded in sort of choosing a different king to rule them. And this is not how a monarchy is supposed to work. A monarchy is supposed to be passed down from king to queen, and so on. So Locke's two treatises, we're going to read just the second one, on civil government, sort of defend the reasoning behind this pseudo-populist revolution, where, in England we have these people who are sort of choosing a ruler, kind of breaking the conceptions of the monarchy. His first treatise, you may be wondering, why aren't we reading the first? Why are we starting with the second? We don't need to read the first. The first is not as widely read as the second. The first is simply a refutation of ideas pertaining to monarchy. It's specifically a refutation of Sir Robert Filmer's Patriarcha, which argues the divine right of kings to rule, and he cites a lot of scripture to support his reasons. The second treatise, which we're going to read, actually lays out Locke's own political philosophy. So we're just going to sort of skip the refutation, because really to read the refutation we'd have to go back and read Patriarcha, and we don't need to do that. And we can very logically just jump right in with the second one there. So that's what you need to know about the second treatise. Let's look at some key vocabulary, starting with arbitrary, the adjective. Arbitrary does not mean random. Okay, for some reason it has developed that modern denotation. Arbitrary does not mean random. Random is a very different word. Arbitrary means subject to individual will or judgment, contingent solely upon one's discretion, as opposed to on some objective form of measurement. So choosing something just because you like it, as opposed to some objective third-party measurement. Okay, that is what an arbitrary decision would be. Some related forms: arbitrariness, the noun, and arbitrarily, the adverb. Next, divine, of or pertaining to a god, especially the supreme being, as in divine laws handed down by God. And then we have a couple related forms: divinity, the noun, and divinely, the adverb. Next, we have treatise. Okay, we're reading a treatise, so it's good to know what it is. A treatise is a formal and systematic exposition in writing of the principles of a subject, generally longer and more detailed than an essay. So it's this formal, sort of really long essay, as in David Hume's A Treatise on Human Nature, or what we're going to read, Locke's second treatise on civil government. Oops, screwed up my animation there. There we go. Excellent. Next up, Commonwealth, the noun. Commonwealth is a state in which the supreme power is held by the people, a republican or a democratic state, for instance, as in the citizens of the Commonwealth. Monarch, the noun. Monarch is a hereditary sovereign, as a king, queen, or emperor. Hereditary meaning passed down by bloodlines, as in the people were ruled by a monarch. We have a couple of related forms there: monarchy, the noun, and monarchical, or monarchal, that's kind of hard to say, the adjectives, which is just of or pertaining to a monarch. Finally, social contract theory, that's a noun. Social contract theory is a bit of political philosophy. It's the view that persons' moral and or political obligations are dependent upon a contract or agreement among them to form the society in which they live. It basically tries to explain why we get together to form societies and don't all live as separate hermits in the woods, and then our obligations toward one another in that society. Basically, it goes something like this: if you choose to benefit from what a society has to offer, you are morally and politically obligated to obey the rules of that society. Social contract theory, that social contract runs counter to beliefs of civil disobedience and that sort of thing. If you choose to live in this country and you accept the benefits such as the various freedoms and also the protection from police and military, that sort of thing. If you accept those benefits, then you in turn agree to live by the rules. All right, that's all your key vocabulary. Your reading list is just the one piece, the second treatise of government by John Locke, chapters 1 through 8 only. Make sure you read the preface, it's some valuable information in there. And again, I've chosen this is a work of early modern philosophy written in the 17th century. It is very dense, but the edition I've chosen for you is a lot less intimidating. It's been heavily abridged and kind of lightly annotated and edited for readability. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in class.